I didn't know my life was finally going to start again the moment I turned my phone off on a small balcony in Barcelona, while my ex-husband was calling me from his wedding night. 2 months earlier, I had boarded a one-way flight with a single suitcase and a heart so exhausted it felt hollow. 5,000 miles was the minimum distance I needed between myself and the wreckage of a marriage that had collapsed quietly, then all at once. Barcelona wasn't a dream. It wasn't an escape fantasy. It was survival. A job arranged through an old Navy connection. A modest apartment near the Gothic Quarter. A city that didn't know my name, my divorce, or the humiliation I'd spent years swallowing in silence. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. No interrogations disguised as concern. No explanations demanded. No late-night arguments that ended with me apologizing for things I didn't break. Just sunlight, foreign streets, and the steady relief of anonymity. Then, 6 weeks after I settled in, after I'd finally stopped waking up with panic in my chest, my phone exploded. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Screenshots, wedding photos, smiling faces framed by white flowers and champagne flutes. My ex-husband had gotten married to Diana. The woman he told me was just a friend. The woman he swore I was imagining things about. The woman he insisted I was being insecure over, right up until the day I found the messages that ended our marriage. The wedding was extravagant, expensive, performative. Diana looked radiant in white, beaming like she'd won something. He stood beside her, confident, proud, untouched by consequence. I stared at the photos for less than 30 seconds before deleting everything. Good for them, I thought. They got exactly what they wanted. And so did I. Or at least, that's what I believed, until a single message slipped through the noise. From Brendan. One of the few people who had stayed neutral through the divorce. You dodged a bullet. Trust me. I didn't reply. An hour later, another message appeared. That stopped me cold. Because Diana didn't lose control. She curated perfection. And for a woman like her to crack in public, on her wedding night, meant something had gone terribly wrong. That evening, as Barcelona buzzed below my balcony and my new life unfolded quietly around me, my phone vibrated one last time. Her number. 3 words. Can we talk? And in that moment, I realized something chillingly clear. I had escaped just in time. And whatever was unraveling back home was no longer mine to fix. If you asked me back then who I was, I would have answered with the version of myself that sounded stable. I was 32 when I married him, Damien, and I truly believed I was stepping into a life that would finally feel safe. Not perfect, not movie romantic, just steady. I had already lived through enough chaos to know I didn't need fireworks. I needed someone who would stay. I grew up learning to be self-contained. The kind of girl who didn't ask for much because asking meant being disappointed. I was the one who handled my own problems, carried my own groceries, booked my own doctor appointments, fixed my own sink when it leaked. Not because I was trying to prove anything, because I'd learned early that if you wait for someone to save you, you'll drown quietly. The Navy made that part of me sharper. I joined young. I don't talk about it much because people always react the same way. Surprise first, then questions, then assumptions about what I must have been like. But the truth was simpler. The Navy taught me structure, discipline, and something I didn't realize I was missing. Belonging without begging for it. And that's where I met Damien. Not directly at first. We ran in overlapping circles. Same base, same friends. Same late-night shifts where everyone's too tired to pretend, and you end up sharing pieces of your life you didn't even know you were carrying. Damien was older than me by a couple of years. Charming in that effortless way men are when they know they're attractive, but he didn't come across as arrogant. He was funny, relaxed, the kind of guy who could talk to anyone without looking like he was trying. At first, he was just there, a familiar face, a friend of a friend. Then one night, after a long stretch of drills and stress and sleep deprivation, We ended up in the same group at a bar off base. Nothing glamorous, sticky floors, loud music, neon lights that made everyone look half sick. I remember laughing at something stupid he said, and the sound surprised me. It was real, unforced, like my chest had been holding its breath and suddenly let go. He walked me to my car afterward, not in a creepy way, not possessive, just present. "You okay?" he asked. I shrugged. "I'm fine." He looked at me for a second too long, like he didn't believe me but wasn't going to push. "You don't always have to be fine," he said. And I hate admitting this, but that one sentence hooked into something deep in me. Because people usually expect you to be fine when you act like you are. They don't offer you softness. They just take your strength for granted. Damien didn't. At least, not at first. We started talking more. Coffee after shifts, texts that weren't just "what's up," but actual conversations. He remembered details, my favorite candy, how I hated crowded places, how I liked early mornings because the world felt less demanding then. He made me feel seen without making me feel exposed. When we finally started dating, it felt easy. And that's what I fell for, how easy it was. I didn't have to chase him. I didn't have to wonder where I stood. He introduced me to his friends like he was proud. He called me late at night just to hear my voice. He showed up when he said he would. So when he got deployed and I cried in the parking lot like an idiot, he cupped my face and said, "I'm coming back to you. I'm not going anywhere." And I believed him. After our service, we transitioned into civilian life almost in sync. I took a logistics job, something stable, structured, predictable. The kind of work that made sense to my brain. Damien bounced around more at first. He talked about bigger things, networking, opportunities. But he always spoke like our future was a shared plan. We moved in together. Then came the proposal. It wasn't extravagant, no crowd, no fancy dinner, just him in our apartment, one knee on the worn rug, holding out a ring like it meant something sacred. "I want you to be my wife," he said. "Not because it's the next step, because you're home." I said yes. I said yes with tears in my eyes because I genuinely thought I'd found the rare thing people spend their whole lives searching for. Our wedding was modest. A small venue, friends, family, simple vows that still make my throat tighten when I remember how sure I was. And here's the part that makes me feel foolish now. I didn't just love him. I trusted him. I trusted him in the quiet ways, like leaving my phone on the counter, never checking his messages, never wondering if he was lying. I trusted him with my body, my future, my name. In the beginning, marriage was good. Not perfect, but real. We built routines. Sunday grocery runs, movie nights, lazy mornings where he'd pull me close and mutter, "Stay," like it was a prayer. But then, slowly, things shifted. Not with a dramatic betrayal at first. Not with lipstick stains or hotel receipts. Just small changes. Damien started guarding his phone more. Not obviously, just subtly. Turning it face down, taking calls outside, smiling at texts, and then clearing the screen too fast when I walked in. At first, I didn't panic. Because I wasn't the jealous type. I wasn't the dramatic type. I didn't want to be the woman who snoops, who accuses, who ruins her own peace by inventing stories. So I told myself I was imagining it. Then his family started showing up more. His mother, Marilyn, was polite in that sharp, cutting way some women are. She never insulted me outright. She just made comments that sounded harmless unless you listened closely. "Oh, you're still in logistics?" she'd say, blinking like she couldn't imagine settling for something so ordinary. Or, "Damien always had big dreams. I hope you don't slow him down." I'd laugh it off, smile, pretend it didn't sting, because I wanted to be the kind of wife who didn't create problems. And that was my first mistake. The second mistake was thinking love alone could compensate for what honesty was starting to replace. Because around that time, right when Damien began acting like our marriage was an inconvenience, Diana entered our lives. At first, she wasn't the other woman. She was just someone. A new connection Damien made through work circles. Pretty, polished, always laughing like she was in on a joke no one else understood. When he introduced us, she shook my hand with both of hers and said, "I've heard so much about you." And I remember the way Damien smiled when she said it, like he liked hearing my name in her mouth. Back then, I didn't understand what that meant. I only knew something in my stomach tightened and didn't fully relax again after that. Looking back now, the warning signs were everywhere. Not loud, not explosive, just persistent, like a quiet dripping sound you convince yourself you'll fix later. After Diana appeared, Damien didn't change overnight. That's the part people don't talk about. Affairs don't always announce themselves with slammed doors and screaming fights. Sometimes they slip in disguised as normalcy, slowly pushing you out of your own life. At first, it was little things. Damien started working later. Not dramatically later, just enough that dinner went cold more often than not. He'd text, "Running behind, don't wait up." And I wouldn't. I'd eat alone, scroll through my phone, tell myself this was adulthood, not abandonment. When he came home, he was distant in a way that felt deliberate. Not angry, not cold, just elsewhere. I'd be talking about my day, about a shipment delay, a difficult client, and he'd nod, hum, maybe squeeze my hand, but his eyes would flick to his phone every few seconds, like he was waiting for something more interesting to arrive. I told myself he was stressed. Everyone gets stressed. Then came the emotional deflections. Whenever I asked simple questions, "Are you okay?" or "You seem far away lately," he'd turn it around. "You're reading too much into things. You're always looking for problems. Can we not do this right now?" I learned quickly that asking for reassurance made me the problem. So I stopped asking. And that's how you start disappearing inside your own marriage. Diana, meanwhile, became present. She showed up at events Damien insisted we attend. Work mixers, birthday dinners, casual gatherings where her presence was always framed as coincidence. "Oh, I didn't know you'd be here," she'd say, smiling too brightly. Damien never seemed surprised. I noticed how they stood close without touching, how they shared inside jokes that didn't include me, how he laughed differently with her, lighter, freer, like he was someone else entirely. Once at a dinner party, she leaned over and said, "You're so lucky. Damien talks about you all the time." I smiled politely, but something about the way she said it felt off, like she was measuring me. Another time, I caught Damien adjusting his tone when she entered the room. Subtle shifts, softer voice, straighter posture. He didn't do that with me anymore. When I brought it up, carefully, gently, he sighed like I'd just asked him to explain gravity. "She's a colleague," he said. "You're being insecure." That word, insecure, landed hard because I'd never been that woman before. I'd gone through military training. I'd handled high-pressure logistics contracts. I knew who I was. But somehow, inside my marriage, I was being reduced to a stereotype I didn't recognize. His family didn't help. Marilyn started making comments that felt less subtle. "Diana's very driven," she said once at brunch. "Ambitious women tend to understand men like Damien better." I laughed awkwardly, not trusting myself to respond. His sister chimed in once too, casually. "You know, some men just need a woman who challenges them." I wondered silently if I was being accused of being too stable, too predictable, too loyal. Damien never defended me. That was the part that hurt the most. When his family implied I wasn't enough, he stayed quiet. Let their words hang in the air like they didn't concern him. At home, our intimacy changed. Not vanished, but shifted. Kisses felt rushed. Touches felt transactional. Nights together felt like obligations instead of desire. I started lying awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering how you could feel lonelier next to someone than you ever did alone. And still, I didn't accuse. I didn't scream. I didn't snoop, because part of me was terrified of what I'd find. Another part of me still believed in the man who had once said I was home. The turning point, the moment I couldn't ignore anymore, came quietly. One evening, Damien left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. It lit up. A message preview. Not explicit. Not incriminating on its own. Just a name. Diana. And a heart emoji. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might pass out. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to, because my body already knew what my mind had been avoiding. When Damien came out, towel around his waist, humming like nothing in the world was wrong, I asked him one question. Are you in love with someone else? He froze. Just for a second, but that second told me everything. Then his face hardened. Where is this coming from? That's when I understood. The truth wasn't going to come freely. I was going to have to drag it out of the man I'd trusted with my life, and I wasn't ready for how ugly that process would be. The night everything finally broke didn't arrive with screaming or thrown objects. It came with denial, sharp, controlled, and devastatingly calm. When I asked Damien if he was in love with someone else, he laughed. Not a big laugh, not cruel, just a short, incredulous sound, like I'd said something so ridiculous it didn't deserve a real response. Are you serious right now? He asked, running a hand through his damp hair. Where is this coming from? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him of anything specific. I just stood there in the kitchen, arms crossed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I saw the message, I said, from Diana. His eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the counter where his phone still lay face down. It was work, he said immediately, too quickly. You're reading into things again. Again. That word felt like a slap. So heart emojis are part of your professional communication now? I asked. He exhaled sharply, irritation creeping into his voice. God, why are you doing this? You're tired, you're stressed, and you're projecting. Projecting. I felt my chest tighten, like something inside me was collapsing inward. I asked you a simple question, I said. Are you in love with someone else? This time, he didn't laugh. He turned away from me, walked to the fridge, opened it, stared inside like answers might be hidden behind the shelves. You're being paranoid, he said finally. And honestly, it's exhausting. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not anger, not hysteria, clarity. Because a man who is innocent doesn't make you feel crazy for asking the truth. I stepped closer. Then say it. Look at me and say you're not involved with her. He shut the fridge door a little harder than necessary. I don't owe you this interrogation, he snapped. Oh. That word echoed louder than anything else he'd said. I'm your wife, I replied quietly. If you don't owe me honesty, then who exactly do you owe it to? Silence filled the space between us, heavy, suffocating. Finally, he spoke, but not to deny it. You wouldn't understand, he said. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? I asked. He rubbed his face, pacing now. It means things have been complicated for a while. For how long? I whispered. He didn't answer. For how long, Damien? I pressed, my hands trembling despite my effort to stay calm. Does it matter? He said. That was it. That was the moment my marriage died. Yes, I said, my voice breaking despite myself. It matters because every day you lied to me was a day you stole from my life. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw annoyance where love used to live. You've changed, he said. You're not the same person I married. I almost laughed. You cheated on me, I said, and you're blaming me for it? I didn't say cheated, he shot back. Nothing happened the way you're imagining. I crossed my arms tighter, trying to hold myself together. Then explain it. Explain the texts, the secrecy, the late nights. He hesitated, and that hesitation was louder than a confession. She understands me, he said finally. She makes me feel alive. There it was. The sentence that detonated everything. I felt physically ill. My vision blurred. My heart pounded so violently I thought I might collapse. And what? He didn't answer. I supported you, I continued, my voice rising despite my efforts. I built a life with you. I stood by you when you didn't know what you wanted to do with yourself. And this is how you repay that? He looked. We grew apart, he said. You know that. Number. We didn't grow apart. He stepped, and then, like a final cruelty, he added, Diana never made me feel trapped. That word, trapped, sliced through me. I backed away, my legs weak. So what now? I asked. You're just done? He sighed, like I was asking him to solve a logistical inconvenience. I think we both know this isn't working, he said. I stared at the man in front of me, the man I'd loved, trusted, built a future around, and realized I didn't recognize him at all. You don't even look sorry, I said. He didn't deny that either. That night, I packed a bag. Not because I wanted to leave, but because staying felt like self-betrayal. As I closed the door behind me, Damien didn't stop me. He didn't follow. He didn't call. And as I sat alone in my car, shaking, staring at the dark street ahead, one thought kept repeating in my mind. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. And choices have consequences, even when the people making them refuse to face them. I didn't drive far that night. I pulled into an empty parking lot behind a closed grocery store and just sat there, hands still gripping the steering wheel, my whole body vibrating like it hadn't gotten the message that the danger was over. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47 p.m., but time felt meaningless, like I'd stepped outside of it. This was shock. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies. The quiet, disorienting kind where your mind keeps insisting this can't possibly be real. I replayed the conversation over and over. She makes me feel alive. You wouldn't understand. Diana never made me feel trapped. Each sentence lodged itself deeper, twisting, refusing to let me breathe. For years, I had worked so hard to be supportive, flexible, understanding. I gave space when he needed it, encouragement when he doubted himself, stability when he didn't know where he was going. And somehow that devotion had been reframed as a cage. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and laughed once, short, broken, almost hysterical. How did I not see this? I whispered to myself. But even in that moment, part of me knew the answer. I did see it. I just chose not to name it. I spent that night on my best friend Maya's couch, staring at the ceiling while she slept in the other room. I didn't wake her. I didn't want comfort yet. I needed to sit inside the pain first, to understand its shape. In the morning, my phone was full of messages from Damien. Not apologies, logistics. We need to talk about the apartment. Let's be adults about this. I don't want this to get ugly. That last one made my hands shake. Get ugly. As if betrayal wasn't already violence enough. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I went for a walk. The air was cold, sharp, grounding. With every step, I tried to piece together the last few years, searching for the moment things truly changed. Had it been when he stopped asking about my day? When he stopped touching me like he wanted to be there? When he started acting like my needs were inconveniences? Or had he always been capable of this, and I'd just been too in love to imagine it? By the time I returned, Maya was awake, coffee in hand, concern written all over her face. Talk to me, she said gently. So I did. I told her everything. The messages, the denial, the confession that wasn't quite a confession, the way he blamed me without saying my name. Maya listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening with every detail. When I finished, she leaned forward. Do not let him rewrite history, she said firmly. This is not a mutual drifting apart. This is cheating, and you are not crazy. I nodded, but doubt still whispered in my head. What if I really did change? What if I wasn't enough anymore? That afternoon, Damien finally called. I almost didn't answer. But I knew avoiding him wouldn't make this easier. It would just delay the inevitable. I don't want to fight, he said immediately. I want this to be clean. Clean. I closed my eyes. Then start by being honest. A pause. I didn't plan for this to happen, he said. It just did. I let out a slow breath. You planned every lie. That's not fair. No, I said quietly. What's not fair is that you had months to emotionally detach while I was still trying to save something you'd already abandoned. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he said, Diana and I are serious. There it was. The confirmation he hadn't given me the night before. How long? I asked. Another pause. Long enough that pretending otherwise would be insulting. I swallowed hard. So, while I was still your wife, yes, he said. The word landed like a verdict. I want a divorce, I said. He exhaled like he'd been waiting for that. Okay, no grief, no resistance, just relief. We talked about logistics, the apartment, the bank accounts, the timeline, everything except the emotional wreckage he'd left behind. When the call ended, I sat in silence, my phone still pressed to my ear. This was really happening. That night, I lay awake again, but this time, the shock began to give way to something else. Anger. Not explosive rage, but a cold, clarifying anger, the kind that asks hard questions. Why had I accepted so little? Why had I swallowed discomfort to keep the peace? Why did I believe being low maintenance meant being invisible? I wasn't blameless in how long this lasted, but I was not responsible for his betrayal. That distinction mattered more than I realized at the time, because it was the first brick in the foundation of the woman I would become after him. Once the word divorce was spoken out loud, everything accelerated. What had been private betrayal turned public spectacle almost overnight. Damien moved fast, faster than I expected. Within days, he told his family. Within a week, Diana was no longer a rumor, but a presence. Within 2 weeks, I was no longer his wife in conversations. I was the past, spoken about like an unfortunate phase he'd finally outgrown. The calls started first. His mother didn't ask how I was. She asked what I had done. Damien says you've been unhappy for a long time, Marilyn said, her voice cool and controlled. That you were difficult. I gripped the phone tighter. Unhappy because my husband was emotionally involved with another woman? A pause. Then a sigh. Well, relationships are complicated, she replied. And men sometimes seek appreciation elsewhere when they don't feel understood at home. There it was. The justification. So I hung up. But it didn't stop there. Friends, our friends, began choosing sides. Some avoided me altogether. Others reached out with carefully neutral messages that felt more like legal disclaimers than concern. I don't want to get involved, but I'm sure both of you made mistakes. I hope you can both find happiness. Happiness. As if this were a misunderstanding, not a calculated betrayal. Damien, meanwhile, leaned fully into his new narrative. He told people I'd been emotionally distant, that I was married to my job, that I wasn't supportive of his ambitions. He never said the word cheating out loud, but he didn't deny it either. He just reframed it as inevitability. She understood me in ways my wife didn't, he said to anyone who would listen. Diana didn't stay quiet either. She posted photos. Subtle ones at first. Coffee cups, sunsets, blurred backgrounds where a familiar hand appeared just at the edge of the frame. Then clearer ones. Dinners, smiles, captions about choosing happiness and listening to your heart. Each post felt like salt in an open wound. I blocked her. Then came the legal pressure. Damien's lawyer contacted me before I'd even retained one. The tone was aggressive, suggesting mediation that heavily favored him, urging me to be reasonable, implying that dragging things out would reflect poorly on me. I hired my own attorney the next day, and that's when I found out how thoroughly Damien had prepared. He'd already moved money, not illegally, but strategically. Accounts shuffled, expenses reframed, conversations documented selectively. He was playing defense, not against me, but against accountability. At one point, during a tense phone call, he said something that finally broke whatever illusion of decency I still had left about him. You don't need to make this harder than it has to be, he said. Diana's pregnant. The world tilted. What? I whispered. She's pregnant, he repeated. So we need to resolve things quickly. My chest tightened so violently I had to sit down. How long have you known? I asked. Recently, he said. But it doesn't change anything about what we're doing. It changed everything, because suddenly the timeline snapped into focus. The late nights, the secrecy, the urgency with which he wanted me out of the picture. This wasn't just an affair. It was a replacement. I hung up without another word. That night, I cried harder than I had since the confrontation, not because I wanted him back, but because I finally understood how disposable I'd been to someone I'd given years of my life to. The next few weeks were brutal. Damien's family closed ranks. His sister stopped responding to my messages. His mother returned my belongings through a courier instead of facing me. People I'd once shared holidays with now acted like I'd never existed. And yet, something unexpected happened. As the pressure mounted, so did my clarity. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped defending my pain to people who benefited from misunderstanding it. I let my lawyer speak for me. And quietly, without announcement, I began preparing my exit, not just from the marriage, but from the life that had shrunk me to fit it. I applied for jobs abroad. I sold what I didn't need. I packed my memories carefully and left the rest behind. Because while everyone else was busy blaming me for a betrayal I didn't commit, I was starting to see something clearly for the first time. If staying required me to keep justifying my worth, then leaving was the only sane option left. People assume the darkest moment is the discovery. It isn't. The darkest moment comes later, when the adrenaline wears off, when the shock fades, and you're left alone with the quiet understanding that the life you planned no longer exists. Mine came the night the divorce papers were finalized. Not signed, finalized. I was alone in the apartment that no longer felt like mine, surrounded by half-packed boxes and bare walls where photos used to hang. The echo was unbearable. Every sound bounced back at me like a reminder of how empty everything had become. I sat on the floor, my back against the couch, holding the official envelope in my hands. This was it. Years reduced to documents and dates. I didn't cry right away. I just stared at the paper, my mind numb, my body heavy like gravity had doubled. It felt unreal. Like I'd stepped out of my own life and was watching someone else's tragedy from a distance. And then the thoughts came. What if this is it for me? What if I gave my best years to someone who never really chose me? What if I'm the common denominator? That last one hurt the most. Because even when you know you've been wronged, self-doubt creeps in quietly. It tells you that maybe you weren't exciting enough, flexible enough, understanding enough, that maybe you should have been more. I found myself replaying moments, searching for the version of myself he might have loved more. If only I'd been quieter, more ambitious, less demanding, less present. That night, I didn't feel angry. I felt erased. The next morning, I went to work and sat at my desk like nothing was wrong. I answered emails, I attended meetings, I nodded and smiled and functioned on autopilot. But inside, I was hollow. During lunch, I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection. My eyes looked unfamiliar, older somehow, dulled by disappointment. "Who are you now?" I whispered. I didn't recognize the woman who had allowed herself to be minimized for the sake of peace. I didn't recognize the woman who apologized for wanting honesty. And that realization crushed me. That evening, I finally broke. I sat on the edge of my bed and cried. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but silent tears that soaked into the blanket. The kind of crying that feels endless because it isn't about one thing. It's about everything you lost, everything you ignored, everything you didn't protect. I cried for the future I'd imagined. I cried for the trust I'd given freely. I cried for the version of me who believed love alone could carry a marriage. At some point, exhaustion took over. And in that fragile, half-awake state, a thought surfaced. Quiet, but firm. I can't stay here. Not just in the apartment. Not just in the marriage. In this version of myself. The city felt too heavy with memories. Every street corner, every cafe, every routine reminded me of who I'd been with him and who I wasn't allowed to be anymore. I needed distance. Real, the kind that forces you to confront yourself without the noise of everyone else's opinions. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for jobs overseas. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. It wasn't survival. By dawn, I had sent out applications I never thought I'd consider. different countries, different lives, different futures. When the sun rose, light spilling across the floor, I realized something small but powerful. For the first time since the affair, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And even though I felt broken, alone, and terrified, that choice was the first real breath I'd taken in months. The offer came on a Tuesday morning. Not dramatic, not life-altering on paper, just an email sitting in my inbox when I opened my laptop at 6:12 a.m., half awake, still wrapped in the heaviness of the previous night. Barcelona, logistics coordinator, competitive relocation package. I read it twice. Then a third time. This wasn't an escape hatch I'd imagined out of desperation. This was real, structured, clean, a job that made sense for my skill set, in a city far enough away that no one could casually drop by and ask me how I was really doing. I closed the laptop and sat there in silence. My heart wasn't racing. That's how I knew it was right. The fear was there, of course, but beneath it was something steadier. Relief. Like my body had already made the decision before my mind caught up. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer to finalize the remaining details of the divorce. Damien didn't attend. He sent his attorney instead. When I signed the last document, my hand didn't shake. "You're handling this well," my lawyer said, almost surprised. I smiled faintly. "I'm done fighting." Outside, the air felt lighter, and for the first time since everything collapsed, I didn't immediately check my phone. That evening, Brendan called. He was one of the few people who had never tried to reinterpret the story. "I heard you're leaving," he said. "I am." There was a pause, then, "Good." Not "I'm sorry," not "Are you okay?" Just good. "You deserve a clean slate," he added. "And for what it's worth, things aren't as perfect over there as they're pretending." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them anymore, because that was the shift. I stopped needing information about Damien to validate my decisions. A week later, as I was packing the last box, my phone buzzed. A message from Diana. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity isn't weakness, it's just human. "I didn't know," she wrote, "about some things. I'm starting to understand now." I stared at the screen. No apology, no ownership, just confusion, arriving late. I typed a response, then deleted it, then typed another, deleted that too. In the end, I didn't reply at all, because the truth was simple. Understanding after the damage is done doesn't undo the damage. 2 days before my flight, Damien called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "I heard you're moving," he said, his voice unfamiliar now, smaller, less certain. "Yes." "That's sudden." I looked around the apartment, bare, quiet, already detached from me. "No," I said calmly, "it's just overdue." Silence. "I didn't think you'd actually leave," he admitted. And there it was. Not love. Not regret. Assumption. "I stopped waiting for you to choose me," I said. "That's all." He inhaled sharply. "I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I replied. "You just didn't care enough to stop." Another silence. Then, "I hope you're happy." I almost laughed. "I will be," I said, "because I finally belong to myself again." I ended the call before he could respond. That night, sitting among suitcases, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure, not forgiveness, ownership of my life, of my choices, of the woman I was becoming. When my plane lifted off the runway 2 days later, I didn't look back. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined me. Barcelona didn't ask me who I used to be. That was the gift. In my first weeks there, my life narrowed to simple, grounding routines. Morning walks through streets that smelled like coffee and bread. Long workdays managing shipments and schedules, tasks that demanded focus and rewarded competence. Evenings practicing Spanish badly and unapologetically, laughing at myself with strangers who didn't know my history and didn't try to excavate it. Back home, though, the truth was unraveling. I didn't go looking for updates. I didn't stalk social media or ask mutual friends for information. But reality has a way of traveling faster than intention. And Brendan, careful as he was, eventually called. "You don't have to listen," he said, "but I thought you should know." I let him talk. The facade Damien and Diana had built began to crack almost immediately after I left. What looked like passion from the outside was pressure on the inside. The pregnancy, announced with staged smiles, had accelerated everything. Living together wasn't romantic, it was tense. Damien's charm, so effective in short bursts, didn't survive daily life. He worked late. A lot. Diana started asking questions she'd once dismissed when I was the one asking them. She checked his phone. She pressed for reassurance. She noticed the same disappearances, the same emotional absences, the same way conversations turned into accusations of insecurity. And Damien did what he always did when confronted. He deflected. He minimized. He blamed. When Diana finally pushed too hard, the mask slipped. They fought publicly, at family gatherings, at restaurants, in front of people who had once applauded their love story. The same friends who had congratulated them began to grow quiet, uncomfortable with the contradictions they couldn't unsee. Marilyn stopped defending him. That part surprised me. According to Brendan, she'd tried at first, insisting stress was to blame, that parenthood was overwhelming him. But when Damien quit his job without telling anyone, expecting Diana to handle things for a while, even his mother ran out of excuses. He had always wanted a savior, just not a mirror. Diana's world shrank quickly. The attention faded. The friends who'd rallied around her victory drifted away when it stopped being entertaining. Sympathy only goes so far when people realize a pattern is repeating itself. She reached out. Not to me directly at first, to Brendan, to mutual friends, to anyone who might tell her how I'd survived what she was now living through. Does she hate me? She asked more than once. The answer was no. But hatred wasn't what she wanted, and it wasn't what she got, because indifference is colder. Damien's reputation took the hardest hit. Once the pregnancy complications became public and timelines didn't line up cleanly, people started asking uncomfortable questions. A coworker mentioned a previous relationship that had ended abruptly. Another recalled rumors that never made sense until now. Patterns don't stay hidden forever. By the time legal discussions began about finances, support, responsibility, Damien found himself isolated. His confidence, once effortless, became brittle, defensive, angry. He blamed Diana for pressuring him. He blamed his job for burning him out. He blamed me for leaving. But none of it stuck because I wasn't there to absorb it anymore. That was the real fallout. Not the fights, not the gossip, not even the legal mess that followed. It was the absence of the woman who had once held everything together, quietly, without recognition, without demand. Meanwhile, my life expanded. I made friends who knew me only as myself, not as someone's wife, not as a footnote to a scandal. I built a reputation at work based on results, not patience. I laughed more easily, slept more deeply. And when I thought about Damien, on the rare occasions I did, it wasn't with triumph or bitterness. It was with clarity. I hadn't escaped chaos. I'd escaped being the only adult in a relationship that required two. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, disguised as ordinary moments. The first time I caught myself humming while walking to work. The first night I slept through without waking up from a dream about him. The first morning I realized I hadn't thought about the past at all. Barcelona didn't fix me. I did, piece by piece, in the absence of constant justification. I learned that strength isn't staying when you're being diminished. It's leaving before you forget who you are. I learned that loyalty without honesty is just endurance, and endurance is not love. I learned that being chosen once is meaningless if you're not chosen again and again, especially when it's inconvenient. Most of all, I learned something that took me years to accept. You can do everything right and still be betrayed. And that betrayal says nothing about your worth. People ask sometimes, softly, cautiously, if I regret leaving the way I did. If I ever wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed, fought harder, tried longer. The answer is no, because staying would have required me to keep shrinking. and leaving allowed me to expand. I didn't win because he suffered. I didn't win because karma arrived. I won because I stopped participating in a story where I was only valuable when I was quiet, patient, and forgiving beyond reason. Love isn't proven by how much pain you tolerate. It's proven by how safe you feel being honest. And I will never again build a life with someone who confuses my steadiness for something disposable. When I stand on my balcony now, the city below, alive and unbothered, I don't feel like someone who escaped. I feel like someone who finally arrived at herself.